Thanks to all of you for coming out. It's really gratifying to see so many faces and so many friendly ones at that. So, encountering revolution. Right? The United States felt the impact of the Haitian Revolution almost as soon as it began. As many of you already know, in August 1791, the enslaved majority rebelled, and over the next 13 years, violence racked the island as black and colored San Domingans faced intractable resistance to their bid for freedom. Plantations went up in flames, Spanish, British, and French armies invaded, and thousands of residents fled to other Caribbean colonies, Europe, and North America. The former slaves persevered nonetheless, and finally, in 1804, the largest slave uprising in history ended with emancipation and national independence. While this remarkable outcome was uncertain in the first stages of the revolution, Americans realized quite quickly that the rebellion had important consequences for their republic. Perhaps no one articulated Americans' apprehensions better than Thomas Jefferson. In the summer of 1793, Jefferson learned that boatloads of refugees from Saint-Domingue were disembarking on American shores. And in a letter to James Monroe, he reflected on what this signaled for the United States. He wrote, "I become daily more and more convinced that all the West Indian islands will remain in the hands of the people of color, and a total expulsion of the whites sooner or later take place. It is high time we should foresee the bloody scenes which our children certainly, and possibly ourselves south of the Potomac, have to wade through, and try to avert them." In the predicament of white slave owners from the French colony, Jefferson witnessed the destiny of his own countrymen. Americans, too, because of their commitment to slavery, would experience civil war. In light of subsequent events in the 19th century, Jefferson's prophecy is powerful. Yet in the same pen stroke, he also suggested that such bloody scenes could be staved off in the United States, that residents could, in his words, try to avert them by drawing lessons from Saint-Domingue. Other Americans I discovered thought likewise, and my book explores how the refugees became a flashpoint for discussing what the Haitian Revolution did and did not portend for the early republic. Throughout the 1790s and early 1800s, locals had frequent contact with exiles from Saint-Domingue, as at least 20,000 black, white, and colored refugees landed in cities along the eastern seaboard, from New York down to New Orleans and everywhere in between. The San Domingans were by no means the largest migrant group of this era. However, they garnered attention disproportionate to their numbers because of the controversial circumstances surrounding their flight. In the streets and markets, at coffee houses and taverns, in boarding houses and parlors, residents came face to face with the Haitian Revolution. I examine responses to the San Domingan refugees in order to understand how the Haitian Revolution shaped the early United States, especially the ways that the exiles forced Americans to confront the paradox of being a slaveholding republic. The refugees were not the only people to stir debate on this score, but in this period, no other event laid bare the contradiction between Republican principles and slavery more clearly than the Haitian Revolution. Slaves and free people of color in Saint-Domingue pushed Republican ideals to the radical conclusion that all men, regardless of race, are free, equal, and entitled to the rights of citizens. The exiles were living examples of the repercussions of this assertion, and their presence in American cities compelled residents to ponder the implications of the Haitian Revolution for the viability of their nation. A lonely few looked to the revolution and its exiles to call publicly for the end of slavery, but not until much later could this argument be made more forcefully. Although free and enslaved black Americans took heart from the bold campaign in the French Caribbean, they struggled to adapt the revolution's message to an increasingly hostile local context. Most white residents, even abolitionists, joined Jefferson in efforts to avoid the replication of Saint-Domingue in the United States, and in the process, they bolstered American slavery and racism. Now, this is the upshot of my project in broad terms. Now I'd like to show these dynamics in action on a smaller, more intimate scale, namely in the lives of two men, the prominent Philadelphia merchant Stephen Girard and his indentured servant Penn. Their story in brief goes something like this. On November 15th, 1794, Crispin, a 16-year-old man, fled from his master, Stephen Girard, and disappeared from Philadelphia. Distressed by Crispin's covert departure, Girard launched a manhunt that persisted for almost 3 years and spanned several states and Caribbean colonies. In the end, Crispin eluded Girard, and the wealthiest man in the United States was forced to swallow his pride and resign himself to the loss. But of course, there's more to it than that. Girard discovered that Crispin had sought refuge in Saint-Domingue. And as Crispin pursued his goal and Girard pursued Crispin, each man found himself facing the implications of the Haitian Revolution. Crispin's path brings to light questions about citizenship and racism, while Girard's engages with issues as diverse as economic prospects, manly honor, and Republican sympathies. Following both sides of this episode allows us to see the various strains of revolutionary influence at work in the lives of these very different but interrelated men. Both Crispin and Girard had migrated to North America, albeit each under dissimilar circumstances. Born and raised in Bordeaux, Girard had immigrated to North America in 1774 after a short stint in the French Caribbean. He worked as a captain on several vessels until settling down in Philadelphia in the auspicious year of 1776. Over the next 2 decades, Girard cultivated a thriving mercantile business, mostly through his trade with France and Saint-Domingue. He married a local woman, but in 1785 committed her to an institution because she was afflicted by a malady, presumably a mental illness from which she never recovered. The couple had no children, so that when Crispin arrived to the household in 1791, Girard, by his own account, kept a bachelor's hall in his large house on Water Street. Now, the details of Crispin's background are murkier, but we know that he was from Malabar, a coastal region of southwest India. In the early 1790s, Girard sought to expand his business into the Indian Ocean, and it seems that Crispin was sent to the United States through Girard's mercantile contacts. In this period, subcontinental Indians were an unusual presence in American cities, and among Girard and his peers, there was some confusion about how to classify Crispin racially. In general, however, he was regarded as a man of color, and Girard soon set him to work as a domestic servant in his home. Now, for the purposes of our discussion tonight, there are 2 aspects about Crispin that warrant attention. First, he spoke French with proficiency. More on the importance of this later. Second, he wore a tricolored cockade, ribbons of red, white, and blue that were woven into the shape of a flower. Now, tricolored cockades, also called national cockades, were pinned to hats or coats and indicated a wearer's support of the French Revolution. Now, self-proclaimed Republicans throughout the Atlantic world displayed national cockades proudly, and in the early 1790s, many Americans were particularly enamored with developments in France. This zeal spilled out onto the streets as cities staged French Revolutionary fetes that were attended by all sectors of society, from the elite to the enslaved. Philadelphia was the site of numerous demonstrations that trumpeted liberty, equality, and fraternity, leaving little room for doubt that Crispin was well aware of the lofty associations of the national cockade he wore. The tricolored cockade took on new significance in February 1794, when the French National Assembly endorsed the rebel slaves' objective in Saint-Domingue by abolishing slavery and granting citizenship to black men. At this moment, the agendas of the French and Haitian revolutions became officially intertwined. White Philadelphians, like their counterparts in other U.S. cities, worried that tales of liberation and citizenship would ignite the smoldering discontent of local African Americans. News about the Haitian Revolution, however, was unavoidable. Philadelphia maintained a brisk and lucrative trade with Saint-Domingue, as the insurrection offered possibilities for fabulous profits to those who braved the unstable conditions. This trade facilitated the flow of information as well. Ship captains and passengers brought word from the island, and their accounts were published in newspapers and read aloud in public and private forums. In the case of Crispin and Girard, these circuits of information touched very close to home. Girard traded extensively with Saint-Domingue in this period. In the first floor of his house, which doubled as his office, he met with employees and other contacts fresh from the colony and discussed recent events and prospects there. Crispin had only to be near the door to overhear conversations about the revolution. The presence of Saint-Dominguez refugees made the impact of the Haitian Revolution visible on the streets of Philadelphia, and they turned up at Girard's door as well. Girard's voluminous correspondence is full of letters from white Saint-Dominguez exiles, calling on Girard for help with everything from finding employment and securing berths on ships to pleas for straight-out financial support. Several black Saint-Dominguez lived in Girard's household during Crispin's indenture. Their owners had sent them to Girard for safekeeping, and Girard complained constantly about how troublesome and insubordinate they were, an indication of the black exiles' disgruntlement with their new situation. 2 of these black exiles attempted to flee Girard's supervision and return to Saint-Domingue. So with these occasions for everyday contact with black Saint-Dominguez and with an ability to speak their language, Crispin most likely learned about events in the French colony and the connection to the cockade he wore, information that would prove invaluable as he plotted his escape. So inspired by news from Saint-Domingue, Crispin absconded from Girard's household in the late fall of 1794. By that time, the end of slavery had been decreed in the French West Indies, yet emancipation on the ground was still very much a work in progress because of invading British forces, counter-revolutionary pockets, and deep-seated racism. In fact, some former slaves were leaving the colony during the Revolution, looking for other, more stable ways to guarantee their freedom. Seen in this light, Crispin's decision to sail to Saint-Domingue was a bold gamble, and his path there was treacherous too. He first made his way to Newcastle, Delaware, exactly how is unknown, where he boarded a ship bound for Jérémie, a port in southwestern Saint-Domingue. The choice of Jérémie was dangerous because it was a British stronghold and hence committed to the return of slavery. But perhaps the destination was intended to allay suspicions about the purpose of his trip, because to complete the ruse, Crispin posed as a slave of a Spanish passenger named Francisco Fabra. Fabra is a mysterious character. His motivations to hump Crispin and details about their relationship, whether the rendezvous was planned or happenstance, for instance, remain elusive. Regardless of the precise arrangement, what is clear is that Crispin felt he needed an accomplice in order to make it safely to Saint-Domingue. Now, for many months, Girard was unaware of Crispin's exact destination, and he came to an entirely different conclusion about why and how his indentured servant had fled. Unable to recognize Crispin's aspirations for freedom, Girard was certain that his slave had been persuaded, or in the parlance of the times, enticed, to run away. This explanation for a servant or slave running away was typical among 18th and 19th century masters, who claimed that nefarious characters tempted servants and slaves with all kinds of promises to disguise malevolent designs. On the one hand, this account gave masters a ready excuse for any runaway. It was a way of denying that slavery was the real motivation behind flight. But on the other hand, servant and slave kidnapping was a contentious practice in Pennsylvania, where black and colored residents struggled to make the gradual transition from slavery to freedom. In the 1780s and 1790s, the Pennsylvania Abolition Society spent most of its time prosecuting people who compromised the liberty of former slaves. Many of these cases involved people who snuck freemen south or to the Caribbean to sell them into slavery. Girard was so convinced of the enticement story that he accused a Frenchman named Joseph Laurel of the crime. Laurel refuted the charge and sued Girard for defamation. Now, the exchange between these two men became heated and involved a litany of public insults ranging from dubious political sympathies to womanizing.